So as you can see, this is the overview of this mini course. So the first one was about creativity, innovation, and meditation, talking about open and closed mode. Then we went through imagination and withdrawal. And this whole thing is using this model in yoga, from yoga philosophy, of what we call koshas, or layers of the mind. And we're seeing how that integrates with the 8 limbs of yoga. So it's the layers of the mind that we through which we get access to different kinds of creativity and intuition. And it's the different yoga practices from the 8-limbed yoga or Ashtanga yoga that we can use to develop these different parts of the mind. That's the kind of overview. The next one was on play, presence, and concentration. And this last session is on intuitional science. And I just put that picture there because I think it's really good. There's a friend of mine in Malta made this. You've probably seen lots of pictures of chakras and yogis and drawings of them, but this is my favoritist of them all. And there is actually a correlation between the chakras and the koshas, these layers of mind. There are 5 koshas or layers, and there are 5 corresponding chakras here, but we're not really exploring that particular, how those 2 models connect in this mini series, but it's kind of probably useful to know. But that all of this is integrated in the practice of yoga and tantra. Now you might remember from last week 3 characteristics of mind. Okay, so I want to review this a little, but then focus on an aspect of it that we didn't really go into so much last week. So the mind must have an object, so it needs to think about something. Remember, and I always found it fascinating how the way our mind works is, of course, reflected in language. So we, all languages, as far as I know, have a subject and an object, and in between a verb. So the subject is doing something to the object. And so, I am looking at the screen. So it's I am the subject, and the screen is the object, and the am, of course, is the verb to be. So, but that comes up in all different languages. So that's just a reflection. Language, of course, is an expression of human thought. It's how we communicate what we're feeling, what we're thinking. So naturally, it reflects the way that our mind works in the first place. And that is that, the first kind of rule is that the mind must have an object. Its nature is to have something to think about. It's a kind of thinking machine. So the second one we explored, and this we went into some detail last week, is we can only think of one thing at a time. And that, of course, enables us to concentrate, which is, it's not actually a disadvantage. It's actually something that gives us this kind of power of concentration. And last week, we talked a lot about time, and particularly the present time, because concentration implies being focused in a moment in time. If we're thinking of more than one point in time, then we're not concentrating, because we're thinking we've not concentrated on a single idea. So mindfulness is a term that's often used almost synonymously with meditation. I think that's a little misleading. I would say mindfulness is a subset of meditation. It's certainly an important element in meditation. And what it implies, what mindfulness generally means, is that we're just thinking of what's going on right now, and not of what happened yesterday and what we think might or might not happen tomorrow. So it's very much about being focused in the present. Okay. But for me, meditation is more than just that. That's one element of meditation, but it's a very important one, and it's related to concentration. So that's kind of just what we were looking at last week. But this last one is what I want to focus on this week. As you think, so you become. Now, I talk about this quite a bit. It's not a new idea. It's a very ancient idea. It comes, the first reference I know to it is in the teachings of Shiva, when the saying actually comes from Shiva's teachings, which go back 7,000 years. So that's really at the root of the tradition of Tantra and yoga, and all of these ideas of mantra and jantra, kundalini, chakras, all these kind of practices we're doing, they originated there. And of course, they've more migrated and morphed, and you'll find them in many other traditions as well. So as you think, so you become. And of course, this is a popular idea in psychology, that, you know, if you focus on something, it'll tend to stick in your mind. It'll kind of, you'll become part of you. But what I want to do here is really highlight the importance of what you think about. Okay, now if it's true that what you think about is what you become, and of course, we're not expected to take that literally. It's not that, you know, you think of an elephant, you are actually going to become an elephant. But what you will find is that if you keep thinking about elephants, you'll find it difficult to get that idea out of your head. It'll become part of your thinking. So if it's true that as we think, so we become, or we tend to become like that, then it becomes very important to choose carefully what we think about, especially if we are applying concentration. So remember dharana, which we learned about last week, which you are actually practicing in your meditation. Concentration amplifies the power of the mind. So if you're thinking about your elephant and you just sort of think, okay, elephant, hello, elephant, goodbye, elephant, you don't really focus on it, it's not going to leave a very deep impression. But if you really, you know, love this elephant, you're thinking about your elephant all the time, you pat your elephant and you wash your elephant, and the elephant's going to stay there. It makes a much deeper impression. So concentration does that. So choosing what we're going to think about in meditation, which is the time we are particularly concentrating, becomes extremely important. Now, I emphasize this because there's a lot of people, when they talk about meditation, I've heard people who claim to be meditation teachers, excuse my skepticism, but who say that it doesn't matter what you think about as long as you concentrate. For me, this could be pretty much a recipe for disaster, given this principle that as you think, so you become. Or they'll say that, okay, you can repeat this mantra, but the mantra doesn't have any meaning, so it doesn't matter what you associate with it. This is taught in one of the most popular meditation schools in the world right now. And I think it's just dead wrong, and it's provably wrong. It's been proven, well, let's put it this way. This principle that as you think, so you become has been proven to be true, not just by thousands or millions of people meditating for thousands of years, and there is subjective verification of that, but it's been validated by neuroscience. And in some of my other talks, you remember we looked at what neuroplasticity and how you keep thinking of the same thing. It creates a kind of a default groove in your brain. So this claim by this meditation school that I'm not going to mention now in case I get in trouble, this claim that the meaning of the mantra, which you're focusing on every day for years at a time, doesn't matter, is patently untrue. So I think I know that it's really important what you think of in your meditation. So as you think, so you become. That's why. Okay, so let's begin to look at what if we're going to if this process of meditation where we're concentrating and whatever we're thinking about becomes more and more real, becomes more and more part of us, what should we think about? So one definition of meditation that I like is that it's the contemplation of infinite consciousness, or the self. You can say it's the contemplation of the sense of self, of your inner awareness, which has no boundary, has no limit. There's actually a meditation practice, I think it was taught by Ramana Maharishi, who was a great saint in India. And his main practice that he taught everyone was simply to ask themselves this question: who am I? And of course, well, I'll tell you a story about this. I might have told this before. Bears repeating though. I've told it many times. I've heard it many times. So the guru of Anandamaga, Anandamurti, he once asked some of his disciples this question, and there were a group of them there. And he just turned to one of them and he said, "Well, who are you?" And this fellow, he's thinking, this is really strange. The guru knows who I am. We know each other. But anyway, he said, "Well, my name's," I don't remember who his name was. His name was Ram, okay? It's in India. "My name's Ram." And the guru was not satisfied. He turned to somebody else, said, "Well, what about you? Who are you?" And he realized that the other Ram had gotten it wrong. So he tried another tack. He said, "Well, I'm an engineer and I work in this place. I live here." He started talking about who he thought he was. The guru wasn't satisfied at all. Came to a third person, said, "Well, what about you? Who are you?" This fellow had been thinking very carefully because he wanted to get it right, of course. He wanted the guru to be pleased with it. So he said, "I am Parama Purusha." So Parama Purusha means supreme consciousness or limitless consciousness. But he said it in such a way, he wasn't sure if it was the right answer because the other two had already got it wrong. And he said, "So I'm Parama Purusha," but he's a little hesitant. So the guru kind of laughed and he said, so he thinks he's Parama Purusha, but he's not quite sure. So I love this line. So then he called him down to the front and he touched him on the head with his stick. He had a kind of stick that he would use to indicate. Touched him in the chakra, this chakra with his stick. And the fellow fell unconscious. He went in samadhi, in this spiritual trance. And everybody's really quiet. So, wow, And of course, the two guys who got it wrong with kicking themselves. And then everybody's very quiet. And the guru says, now he knows who he is. So that experience is the object of what I call spiritual meditation. Not just what I call it, what in our tradition we call spiritual meditation. In Sanskrit, we call it dhyan. Dhyan means spiritual meditation. It means the contemplation of the infinite, or the contemplation of the limitless sense of self, right? Why do we have a picture of islands here? So if we think of islands as a metaphor for ourselves, what might that tell us? How are people like islands? So this is not a rhetorical question. This is a question I want you to take a stab at. So just type in the chat if you can think of some ways that people are like islands. And let's see if any of you, we have to, okay. Somebody's typed something in the chat. Let me see. Here we go. I'm not getting any guesses at islands. I want to know why you think we're like islands. Let me make it a little easy. Okay, you've jumped straight to my conclusion. That's very good. That's a good one. I want to hear some more from you. How might there be a metaphor? Okay, this is a very obvious metaphor. It seems, especially to all you wise, spiritually aware people. But keep going. Let me hear from more of you. Yeah. So this is why I use this metaphor, because it, if we look, as in this view, from above, at the surface, or what's above the surface, what do we see? Yeah, that's nice. Okay, I'll read these out in a moment. We've got lots of lovely answers here, actually. I'm going to keep these. These are good. If we look at the surface, if we look at another person, we see their physical form. Even if we know them a little bit, what we see is just the bit that shows above the surface, right? We may guess at something about their personality, but we just see the physical form. We see the expression on their face. We hear what they say, so we can get to know what's behind, what's sort of in the deeper levels. But the bit that shows above the surface is just the very tip. So beneath the island, there is a mountain. So there you have a whole lot of hidden mind, if you like. This is what we call the subconscious. So it's literally beneath. So beneath the surface. So beneath the surface of the water, water, I got to keep my proper accent. Beneath the surface of the water is this mountain. And that could be, you know, all of our memories and thoughts and personal quirks and talents and dreams and ambitions and all the mind and all that's in it and all the forgotten things. And of course, if we go deeper still, as all of you jump to very quickly, if we go deeper still, we find that all islands are connected. So I think this is a wonderful metaphor for the self, for human beings, for what is a human being. So let me tell you what all of you came up with, because these are really quite lovely. So each island is still a part of the same land. Exactly. We're all connected, essentially. Islands are connected under the sea. We all actually do fit together. That's a lovely thought. Yes. We can all get along is the implication, perhaps. People are like islands as their connection is below the surface. Very good. And we are not physically connected, but we are spiritually connected. Exactly. So, yeah, thank you for your insights there, because this is, it's something that's kind of obvious if we think about it. Of course, it's obvious about islands. We know that that's a physical metaphor, but it's also kind of obvious if we think about what we are. Who am I? Who am I really? So, of course, we have this kind of we identify with the physical body, but we know that's the most superficial part. We identify with our minds, our thoughts, our feelings, and our memories, and all of that, and our dreams. But that changes all the time, right? But this part of us that doesn't change, the witnessing entity within us, we call the Atman in Sanskrit, Atman, that is witnessing and observing the mind and enabling us to experience all of this and to identify. It's the Atman that identifies with the body. This inner I feeling, that is the focus of our meditation. Okay. Now I want to play you a little video. I love this this little story that this fellow tells. Let's see if you recognize him. He's quite famous. It's a little blurry picture. Sorry, it's but the voice is clear. You'll see in a minute. Who knows who this is? I want to see that in the chat. Can you recognize him? I'm going to give you a big clue if you don't guess. He's a comedian. Okay, getting there. No, not Arnold. It's a little, very good. Deepak, you got it. Jim Carrey, thank you. A couple of you got it straight away. Yeah. Jim Carrey, great comedian, very, very, very brilliant, very crazy. And he let him tell the story for himself, because he is far more eloquent than I am.
A few months ago, I understood suddenly how thought was just an illusory thing, and how thought is responsible for, if not all, most of the suffering we experience. And then I suddenly felt like I was looking at these thoughts from another perspective, and I wondered, who is it that's aware that I'm thinking? And suddenly I was thrown into this expansive, amazing feeling of freedom from myself, from my problems. I saw that I was bigger than what I do. I was bigger than my body. I was everything and everyone. I was no longer a fragment of the universe. I was the universe. And ever since that day, I've been trying to get back there. It comes and it goes. It's like riding a wave. Sometimes I'm on, sometimes I'm off. But at least I know where I want to go.
Classic. Okay. I love this little speech that he gives. He, oh, let's come back. We'll stay with Jim. Um, so I'd like to get your responses to that. What jumped out at you from that talk? What really struck you in a sense as something that you could relate to, that resonated with you? Perhaps you've been fortunate enough to have a similar experience. In fact, if we have time, I might ask some of you if you have had some experience like that. They're all not all the same. Everyone is slightly different. Same experience. Okay, we're getting that. Yeah. Anything else about the way he expressed it? Did anything else jump in? Okay, his realization that comes and goes, the fleeting sense and goes away. Right? Didn't that resonate? Really, certainly did with me. Like you had the taste, and you really want it back. But I think the of course that was his ending point. I know what I want now. At least that is so important. And in our tradition, we talk a lot about the importance of the goal, understanding clearly what is your goal. We call that ishta in Sanskrit. Ishta, that describes the spiritual goal, the ultimate state that he's describing pretty nicely here, I have to say. But he said complete freedom. I love that. Any other thoughts on that? Remember when he was talking about what led to it? It was he went in certain stages. He went to the stage where he was asking himself, who is it who's doing the thinking? Right? I don't quite have the exact words, but so in other words, he's taking this step back and identifying with the witness, the observer. That's a very important concept in meditation, and it's very important skill, if you like, that we need to develop in meditation, is the ability to feel that I'm the witness of my mind, right? I'm witnessing what's happening in my mind. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in what he said here, but the wisdom came from the experience. It was an insight, it was an understanding, it was an intuitional revelation. I'm not quite sure what led to it. One is born. I feel I'm bound to wonder whether it was some kind of hallucinogen. Can sometimes certain types of drugs can, revelation, intuition. Right? Certain types of drugs can act as a catalyst for this kind of experience, but then of course it goes away again. This is lovely from Krishnendu. St. Francis said, the one you are looking for is the one who is looking. Exactly. So that comes back to that earlier question, who am I? Okay, so this is very, very relevant to the spiritual search. And Jim Carrey is very serious about meditation now. He's changed his life very much. Before he had this experience, he was suffering a lot from depression. He had a lot of problems, and he's found that his meditation practice has really helped him tremendously. So thank you for your comments about the wisdom of comedians. I'm a bit obsessed with comedians, aren't I? Because I played you this video from John Cleese back in the first of these, talking about open and closed mode. Yeah, I sometimes worry about myself, but I try not to. So let's jump forward to something that somebody who really understood this said. So this is a quote that I used last week, you may recall. Oh, we got another comment here. Let me just see what that takes me. Takes us. Yeah, you agree about the depression dissipating. Okay, that's great. So meditation. There is also some neat research into this. Depression is very complicated and it's difficult, but many people have experienced that the right kind of meditation practice really can help a lot with depression. And you remember I talked about this research into kirtan that they conducted at Macquarie University in Australia. and one of their key findings, at least key for me, was that kirtan, when compared to silent meditation, so they have the out, chanting the mantra externally and then chanting the mantra internally, they were comparing the two, which is an unusual study. And they found that at least at this elementary level, which is, they were dealing with pretty much complete beginners, I believe. But at this early level, chanting is actually more effective in resolving and reducing depression, anxiety, stress. And remember, increasing altruism, kindness. But they found, and I think this is very key, that for beginners at least, the chanting was more effective than the silent meditation. So that's something. So kirtan, the chanting we do, is actually something that our Guru Anandamurti, you see his picture there, I love this photo. He said that for some people with really severe psychological problems who maybe are even institutionalized and actually can't meditate, their mind may be so disturbed, they may not be able to concentrate at all. He said that, but they can do kirtan, they can practice chanting and listen to kirtan, and this will benefit them greatly. And if they persist, probably bring them to a point where they can actually practice silent meditation as well. So both of these practices are tremendously important, but kirtan is more accessible. It's easier, that's why I emphasize beginners. When they're researching using beginners, what they discover is what happens for beginners. People who are at a more advanced stage in meditation may well find that the silent meditation takes them somewhere deeper, but it's more difficult. Okay, let's look at this quote. So Prabhat Ranjan Sakha, by the way, just so everybody knows, Prabhat Ranjan Sakha has kind of three names. In Anandamaga, his followers, have three different names from. So Prabhat Ranjan Sakha is the name in his passport. That's his legal name. And his books on social issues, social commentaries like on economics, or this is actually from a book on the arts and how the arts should be used in society. And those kind of more external issues. He writes them under this name, Prabhat Ranjan Sakha. His spiritual books, he uses his spiritual name, which was Sri Anandamurti, and his disciples usually, we personally would call him Baba, which means it's a term of endearment. So it's like beloved, and it has that meaning in that context. So he has three names, so it's a little confusing. So he said this, and I read it last week, so I'm not going to go through it again because I want to focus on a particular piece from it. But in essence, this is saying that the problem for a lot of creative and brilliant people, where they often find themselves to be very emotionally disturbed, unhappy, addictive behavior, even really lose their sanity, and bipolar, the bipolar condition, and even suicide is more common amongst brilliant and creative people. And what he's saying here, it's because there is this war within them, which is unresolved, where they have this temporary, he calls it temporary sense of subtlety. So the sublime experience of this sort of creative flow and being in the present when you're creating or realizing something, but their own lives are in conflict with that. Their own lives may be very, could say, out of step with what they're experiencing, and this creates this internal tension and can cause tremendous suffering. But the key thing here for me, and I always like to focus on solutions rather than problems, the key point in this quote is this: seek for that transcendental entity. That is the way to resolve this internal war, this internal conflict and suffering, where we are torn between conflicting forces within ourselves. And as it's a sort of a side theme of this little series on meditation creativity is this issue of the suffering that creative people can endure, can experience, but this is the resolution to that, to seek for that transcendental entity. Then that experience of the sublime becomes more and more a part of your everyday experience, and you, as a part of that, you change. You become more the kind of person that you really would love to be. So what are we doing? Seeking for that transcendental entity. That is dhyan. That is the meditation on the limitless self that I've been talking about here. So it's actually the seventh limb of Ashtanga Yoga, dhyan, or spiritual meditation. So in this series, I focused on three things: on withdrawal, or let's go back to the Sanskrit. Pratyahara translates as withdrawal. Dharana translates as concentration. And dhyan translates as spiritual meditation. All right. I've been focusing on those three practices in particular. There are 5 others. That's something I might teach in a different course on the whole thing of Ashtanga Yoga and the whole set of koshas. I'm going to give you a bit of a snapshot of what that whole, the overview looks like when we put it all together. So let's go back to our layers of the mind. Do you remember these characters? Inside you, there is a little dog, and there's a robot, and there's a crazy person who's brilliant, but a little imbalanced or eccentric. There's a wise sage and the illuminated. Where's my illuminated saint? There you are. So you might remember that was Ananda Moyima, a wonderful Indian saint who lived last century. Lao Tzu, the great Chinese sage from ancient times. Salvador Dali, that's a pretty crazy Spanish artist, but undoubtedly a brilliant genius. This robot, I don't know this, I think this robot probably has a name. I think this robot's from a movie. Anyone know the name of the robot? I can't remember. Kind of cute. Okay. And the dog is just a dog. I don't know if this dog has a name, but the point being that these kind of represent the different parts of our mind and the way that we behave and the qualities that are associated with them. So we're just revising that. So the practice of dhyan particularly develops awareness, which is a kind of, as I said last week, when did I talk? I think I might have touched on it last week, but on Tuesday I went into this in more depth as a kind of intro to this. It's the whole, the feeling of self-awareness, the sense of existence, the I, knowing who I am, the I who's, watching what's happening with my mind. So dhyan cultivates this awareness, this knowledge of the self. So you'll remember that let's put them all together here. So here we have our Ashtanga Yoga. You've got all the little octopuses, all right? There's 8 of them. I'm not giving you the Sanskrit. Some of you know the Sanskrit. You might even find it more familiar. So let's start from the bottom. We've got don't be evil. Or we'll start with postures. Postures, asanas, yoga postures. So that's the foundation of the body. The physical body is, of course, the foundation of the mind. It's the vehicle which the mind occupies and which the spirit or the awareness is able to act through and experience through. So postures, yoga postures, help to develop and perfect the physical body, keep us in good health, and actually make it easier to meditate, because they really work on the nervous system and the glandular system and help to bring the mind into a kind of balance, into a more emotional balance. The next two limbs, if you like, are Jama and Niyama. I've translated them as don't be evil and do be good. It's a little trite almost, but there are 10 of these and it's complicated. But essentially it means to deliberately govern our behavior, to learn how to restrain ourselves when we feel like we want to hit somebody or we want to do something crazy, to learn self-restraint and pause and think, okay, let's get a little control here. So, and then really become aware of our behavior. And one of you commented last week, or it might have been Tuesday, that the practice of Jama Niyama, these kind of do's and don'ts, really have helped you. And this is actually related to guilt. One of the reasons that some people find it difficult to meditate is because they find it difficult to like themselves, or to love themselves, even more importantly. This is a big problem. if we cannot love ourselves and we're meditating on ourselves, this becomes difficult, right? And one of the things that makes it difficult to love ourselves if we have guilt. If we feel, I did something, and it might be something really big. I mean, I'll give you an extreme example. I'm sure this doesn't apply to any of you, and I sure hope it doesn't. But I was at a kind of seminar, psychology kind of seminar thing, which I wouldn't want to repeat, but I mean, I wouldn't want to do it again. But it involved people getting up on stage and confessing telling the worst things that had happened to them in their lives. And some of them were victims of abuse, as you can imagine. And some of them were people who had, well, in this case, had done something terrible. So a perpetrator. This guy was a veteran. He had fought in Vietnam many years ago, decades ago. And he had been part of a massacre of women and children. And he had killed women and children. And he had never forgiven himself. And he'd been in therapy for probably 30 years. And he was still, plagued with guilt, as is totally understandable. And so, very extreme case. But for somebody like that, it's very, very difficult to look inside, because what do you find there? This awful feeling and self blame and just the sense that you're not worthy even to be loved. So that's a very extreme case, but many people feel that to varying degrees, and it's normally far milder than that. And it is possible to overcome these things, but not easily, and not as easily as these people in this psychology, so-called quasi fake psychology thing we're trying to claim. Anyone else look into that? But it's called Landmark, by the way. I'm not convinced. And just to give, I spoke to a psychologist about this actually afterwards, and I didn't, I kept it anonymous, but I asked him, I said, what can somebody like that do? And he said, well, it's not as easy as just confessing it, because he's been doing that for 40 years already. He's been confessing to his therapist, and he still feels it. Of course he does. He said, something as big and as dire as that, the only way that somebody who's done something like that could conceivably resolve that would be to basically dedicate the rest of their lives to serving the same people who had been harmed, to say, okay, my life project is to create a children's home for orphans in Vietnam or something like that. And there are stories about people who've done that. And to me, that's the solution. It's got to be really big. It's got to be really extreme. It's got to be big enough so that in your mind, it compensates, at least to some degree. Maybe it can never be fully compensated for, but at least to the degree that you can manage. And it's got to involve sacrifice, self-sacrifice. And it's got to involve service, so that you feel that you're in some way balancing what you've done. On a more human level, we all have little bits of guilt, depending. If you're brought up a Catholic, you probably got more than most. It's a bit unfortunate that there's such an emphasis on that. But there's a much easier way to deal with it than, doing something that makes you feel terrible about yourself and then having to figure out what to do for the rest of your life. It would be much easier if we didn't do those things in the first place. Imagine if he could relive that moment and have the courage to defy his commander, because he didn't initiate that. I know this a bit more detail of the story. He didn't initiate that. He was ordered to. But if he had had the courage to defy his commander and refuse to do this, it would have been very difficult, but it would have saved him. So we have smaller challenges than that as a rule. In our daily lives, we sometimes feel urges to do things, or we're told to do things that we know are wrong. But if we are able to correct course in the moment and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't feel comfortable about that. It doesn't feel right. life becomes so much easier, because you interrupt this process of accumulating samskaras, they're called. This is a lead in, this is a segue to next week, actually. That's on this. So it's the karmic reactions, and they're stored in the mind, and they come from us, realizing that we've done something. Can be good, can be, oh, I did something great, now I'm proud of myself. That's also a samskara. But we can avoid all of that if we learn to regulate our behavior, and we develop a more acute conscience, or we listen to our conscience, and we avoid making the obvious mistakes, and you get better at it, and still you make, we're very good at repeating mistakes, but eventually we learn. The more quickly we learn, the less we suffer. It's kind of a simple equation, really simple but not easy, one of those. So jama and niyama, these principles of not doing certain things, doing certain things as much as possible, and always refining that, is the foundation of this whole practice. Actually, it's tremendously important, because it stops you going backward. It stops you accumulating more problems for yourself. What did Jim Carrey say? I forget. I'm not my problems. So that's a practice in itself. Stop identifying with the problems and the mistakes and the guilt and the person who we no longer are, actually, but that person, that memory. But to avoid doing those things, or to do the good things in the first place, is far easier in the long run. So that's another, some of the foundational stuff that we didn't look at all in this little series, because I focused on the sort of three later ones: the withdrawal, concentration, and spiritual meditation. But if you don't have this kind of foundation, it's difficult to do those practices. It's not really possible to go deeply into these other practices and remain balanced. Breathing, or pranayama, is the next level. That's just that helps to calm the conscious mind. It's easy to understand that we have an intuitive understanding of this. If somebody's getting upset or angry, or they're saying something crazy, and you can see that they're a bit out of control, there's a saying in America, they'll say, take a breath, right? That familiar? Take a breath. So what if you do that? What happens? If you pause, maybe you're angry, maybe you've said something ill-considered that might hurt somebody, or it's foolish. You pause, you take a breath. It actually calms the mind a little. And this is used in I might have mentioned this. I don't remember everything I've taught to a particular group, but I might have told you that there is a technique that's used by the US Navy SEALs. They're the commandos, highly trained soldiers. And they have a breathing technique that helps to control panic attacks. And they teach it to their commandos. And it's a series of breathing where you control the breathing, and you count as you breathe in and breathe out, and it's a pattern of breathing. And it's been shown to really resolve panic attacks just very quickly, in a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. And I saw it used in a movie, actually. I was quite interested. But this is it's a kind of pranayama. It's controlling the flow of vital energy through the breath, and it really calms the subconscious mind. And it's a very important practice in meditation. If you have the first lesson in Ananda Marga meditation, there's a very simple form of this that you'll be practicing already. And the way that we teach yoga asanas with regulated breathing, we count the breathing, we breathe in a particular way and out in a particular way, that's also a form of pranayama. And you'll notice, if you do that, the effect it has. It can be very helpful in calming your mind. We've got a couple of comments here I'd like to hear. Great, okay. Square breathing, is that what of course, you've got a sort of martial arts background. Square breathing. There's a complicated one before that I'm going to, okay, it's worth commenting on. It's from Krishnendu. Perhaps the Atman is not the mind. Yeah, it's true. It's already one with Brahman. Yeah. Well, Atman and Paramatma. Yeah, this is a good point. I'm going to paraphrase you. I hope you don't mind. It's referring back to what I said earlier about the self, the sense of self. What we're essentially doing in this meditation, in Dhyan, is learning to identify with the Atman, or with Paramapurusha, as the fellow in the story said, he said, who are you? I'm Paramapurusha. He thinks he's Paramapurusha, but he's not sure. Okay. What we're doing in meditation is trying to convince ourselves that we are actually infinite consciousness. So what that means is that we're no longer identifying with the mind and all the thoughts and the personality and all the changing stuff that we typically think we are, and the guilt. Okay. So we're actually, it's not that we're trying to perfect the mind, because that's really not possible. We're ceasing to, or learning not to identify with it. So we're shifting our sense of who we are. And that's a fundamental difference from most kinds of therapy, to be honest. It's really different. Rather than trying to repair something that's damaged and ultimately can't be perfected, we're actually shifting our sense of who we are. Very important. Thanks. I hope that was a reasonable representation of what you said. I'm not going to teach them square breathing right now, Hitendra, but thank you. Okay. As you can see, there's a lot to this, these different layers. And what I'm doing here, as you'll notice, is I'm kind of filling in a little bit the stuff I left out of Ashtanga Yoga and how it relates to the layers of the mind. I've already talked, over the last 3 weeks about how withdrawing the mind from the world stimulates creativity, and then the next level, how concentration and the stillness that it brings can develop that kind of intuitive wisdom. And in this session, how spiritual meditation, identifying with the Atman or the Paramatman, the limitless self that is already free, which I think was your point, Krishnendu. Identifying with that is what brings us transcendental awareness and the ultimate intuition of what Jim Carrey described as I am the universe. Okay. Or he said it in the past tense, I was the universe. He still is, but he's forgotten. And he's been trying to get back there ever since. As have any of us who've experienced something like that. Okay, so that's, now this is getting crowded. This drawing here is getting a bit crowded. We've got a bunch of levels of mind, or the koshas. Now I've been saying there are 5, but if you count the physical body, there's 6. It's usually, the body is usually not counted, but it's called the Annamaya kosha, the food layer. But you could say there are 6. So they're all there. And then we've got these 8 limbs of yoga. So there's a bunch of them. And this picture's getting crowded, but I'm going to crowd a little bit more by bringing back our little friends, okay? Let's just do that. And we're going to bring the little dog and the robot and the crazy artist and the wise sage and the illuminated saint. And this is how these, you know what dovetailing is? I learned a little bit of woodwork in school, and we used to create this thing where you've got one piece of wood and it's notched in such a way that it fits into the other bit of wood. And I always thought it was really cool, but I could never get it very exact. But when other people did it better than me, I liked it. So these 2 systems, these layers of the mind and the 8 limbs of yoga, they actually fit together. They're designed to be integrated. Ashtanga yoga was designed to purify and perfect the body and all of the layers of the mind in a balanced way, which for somebody who is perhaps a very, maybe very brilliant or creative, but unhappy person, is incredibly valuable. I consider this a great treasure. So I just have a last question for you. After all these weeks, I've been going on about my pet obsession about where do ideas come from. What do you reckon? Can you tell me? Write something in the chat about what you think about where ideas come from. And I'm going to admire this brilliant photograph. This won a competition. I got it from a book. I can't remember which book. So your question is, your puzzle, after all this, what's your understanding of where ideas might come from? Okay, let's get a few more. Got one, thank you. Oh, we got lots. Oh my God. Okay. Sudden rush. All right, let me go through these and I'm going to dissect and criticize your thoughts. No, I'll be kind. And you're mostly pretty much right anyway. So yeah, these are all, I think they're all great. So let's start. So ideas are channeled from ultimate consciousness. That's one way of putting it. I'll just read them all out and then I'm going to give you a sort of an overview here. They come from the universe, from the subconscious mind. Interesting. Parampurusha gives all thoughts to creation and we tune into the ones we concentrate on. That's a nice thought. From the self, they come from supreme consciousness and get dropped right into us during withdrawal. I like that. That's kind of creative in itself. From the consciousness reservoir. Okay. These are all, I mean, none of these are really wrong, but so the point I want to make here, just sort of to give a little perspective on these thoughts, is remember that the mind is layered. Okay. Ultimately, yes, it's true what many of you have said here. All ideas come from cosmic consciousness. That's how the universe was created. Everything is, you know, Paramapurusha this isn't a microphone. This is Paramapurusha thinking of a microphone. So that is the process of creation. I'm not a me. I'm Paramapurusha thinking of me. Okay. That's the ultimate reality as I understand it. And as yoga philosophy would put it more eloquently than me most of the time. But I want you to see this as in a more nuanced way. There's more detail to it than that. So you've touched on that, Deepak, when you said from the subconscious mind, but that is not exactly what this model is telling us. So in the model of koshas, let's go back to our little robot and all these people. Sorry, little boy, we're going back to our robot. Where's our robot? Oh, I know what I did. I added, here we go. It's all in bits. Okay. So the subconscious mind is represented by the robot. And the point about the subconscious mind is called Manamaya Kosha in Sanskrit, is that it actually doesn't come up with ideas. It stores and reorganizes ideas, but it never comes up with a new idea. And this was Einstein's point. He said the origin of all new ideas is actually the intuition. So the intuition starts at the next level, where we get creative ideas, and then we get you could say intuitive insights. I call that wisdom, and then awareness itself, which is the ultimate intuition, is knowing that we exist. So actually, ideas come from the realm beyond the subconscious. Okay, just to get some clarity there. And of course, the other thing about this model that I love, this idea of layers of intuition. So each layer of intuition gives us a different quality of idea, if you like. So the level of the Atimanas Kosha, the level of creativity and personality. So imagination, that's like, it's kind of small ideas. It's a creative writer like me coming up with a silly science fiction story, or, a better writer than me coming up with Lord of the Rings, way better. That's coming from this level still. The next level is the insight, where people discover fundamental truths. The yogis discovered that visualizing the chakras in a particular way enable changes in our minds, enable us to control our minds. That's intuition. Of course, the sort of physics insights of Einstein, the chemistry breakthroughs of Vasily Mendeleev, these are intuitive breakthroughs that come from this level of intuition, and the awareness itself that's common, that comes to all of us from the most subtle level of mind, which is just below pure consciousness in a sense. I hope that brought a little more clarity. Okay, we're going to end there. So I'm obsessed, obviously, with Einstein, firstly with Anandamurti and his teachings, but great, but lesser beings, various very colorful comedians and artists and musicians, and Einstein. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, And the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Tremendously insightful. This is attributed to Einstein. It's not clear whether or not he actually said this, but I'm going with it. I'm running with it. But this I think is profound because it kind of tells us why this is important. I mean, you might think, well, who cares about whether people are intuitive or not, or whether they use their rational mind or not? It's like their personal thing. But no, it has repercussions. And it has huge repercussions because in our society, we overvalue rationality and logic, and we undervalue intuition. And the ultimate intuition is the intuition of our oneness, which means that we can love one another. And that is a much better solution than all the things that the intellect can come up with. All the cleverness, it amounts to nothing if it's not motivated by love. So that's what I think anyway. And so does this otter. So there. Thank you all very much.